was right after 8 a.m. on September 5th, 1934, when a man was gathering driftwood here at Euclid Beach, when he thought he had found a tree trunk. And he got closer, he realized it wasn't a tree trunk. Join me today on Walk with History as we talk about the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, or the Cleveland Torso Killer in Cleveland, Ohio. Hi, I'm Jen of Walk with History, and today we're going to talk about the Cleveland Torso Killer, or the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run.
These murders happen in the 1930s, during the throes of the Great Depression. Black Tuesdays happened in October of 1929, and over the course of the next 4 years, 13 victims will be discovered from 1934 to 1938, all linked to one serial killer. And that one serial killer was enough to bring in the infamous Elliott Ness, but even he couldn't bring the murderer to justice.
Here on Euclid Beach in Cleveland, Ohio, is where victim 0 was found. And they claim her as victim 0 because they didn't realize she was a part of this crime spree until all of the other victims had kind of been cataloged. September 5th, 1934, she was found here, just her torso. Her head was never found, or her hands. She had been dead a couple days. But what was interesting about her was not only that her head and hand were never recovered, but some kind of substance had been put on her skin to preserve it. It made it kind of a leathery red color. And that is what's going to tie her case to the other cases as well. Also, victim 7 will also be found here on Euclid Beach, February 23rd, 1937, and she'll be found in close to the same location. So that also leads people to believe that victim 0 is part of the Cleveland Torso Killer's victims. Victim 0 has also gotten the name Lady of the Lake. Euclid Beach here in Cleveland, Ohio was known for having an amusement park here. I think this circle here was some kind of like carousel. To have bodies found here was not very good for tourism. Although this is the 1930s during the Depression, so people are searching the lake waters for driftwood so they can burn for fire, which is how victim 0 was discovered. I am in the Kingsbury Run area of Cleveland, Ohio. And after the stock market crash of October 1929, the 1930s in Cleveland are hit pretty hard with unemployment. About 50% unemployment happens here in Cleveland. The country is experiencing high unemployment. 6 million people unemployed in 1931, and in 1933, thousands of banks close. So no one can get loans for homes, no one can get jobs. So this area becomes a shanty town, or a Hooverville, as they called it. And they called it a Hooverville because President Hoover was the president during the stock market crash of 1929. He did nothing to really help get the infrastructure back and protect the banks, and that's when the banks failed. And so it was crippling for the economy in America. So these makeshift communities happened where the unemployment of these people who were immigrants, minorities, didn't have any other family here in America, couldn't really speak the language, built these makeshift homes to live. And Kingsbury Run became a famous Hooverville shantytown in Cleveland. The name Hoover gets synonymous with a lot of different things that are used at that time. You'll hear the Hoover blanket, which is like a newspaper, so someone covering themselves up with a newspaper is the Hoover blanket. The Hoover flag is your pocket pulled out to show that you have no money. That becomes a Hoover flag. And it's right on a railroad line, which is important because you got the vacant lots here that people can live in, and also important for transportation. So this is the 1930s. This is when people are tramps.
Once a tramp, always a tramp.
Jump on a train, jump off a train for transportation. You have no ties, you have no money, you have no possessions. So moving from town to town, trying to find work, trying to find food was a way of life. This is where the Cleveland Torso Killer will operate out of. Most people believe that he lived here. I say he when I talk about the Cleveland Torso Killer because we know that 12 of his victims, 7 were men and 5 were women.
I was distinctly promised no man.
They believe the Cleveland Torso Killer was a male because of the strength. So most of the victims were bled and cleaned and dismembered and then put in some kind of carrying apparatus, a cloak, a hat, a jacket, a blanket, and disposed of. 1930, shanty town, you're not gonna see a lot of cars, so you would have to carry that. And you would have to carry that to another location. So this person would have to be relatively strong to carry a person from location to location. And that's why they believe the Cleveland Torso Killer was me. So what would make this case have so many unsolved victims? A lot of the heads were recovered. They were able to find what those people look like, but no one identified them. Why? Most of the victims are coming from this shanty town, and you have addicts, you have alcoholics, you have the derelicts of society, you have alternative lifestyles, which in 1930 are not looked at favorably. So they live on the outskirts, and they operate within groups of people who don't want to be involved with the police, don't want to talk to the police. So if someone goes missing, or they recognize the murder victim, they don't even want to talk to the police to let the police know who they are. So that is why in this particular case, you only have 2 victims of the 12 that were ever identified. The other 10 will never get names. They are Jane Does and John Doe. I'm at 49th and Praha in Cleveland, Ohio, which was the location of Jackass Hill in Kingsbury Run. This is where victim 1 and 2 were found of the Cleveland Torso Killers. It was September 23rd, 1935. 2 boys were climbing the hill, playing around, and they saw what they thought was a pants or jacket and unraveled it, and a person's head came out and called the police. Of course, they found 2 men's bodies about 30 feet away from each other. They were naked, they had been beheaded, they had been emasculated, and one of them was identified. So this is the first identified victim of the Cleveland Torso Killer. His name was Edward Andrassy, and he was a hospital orderly for a couple years, and that's how they were able to identify him, because his fingerprints were on record. He had quit that job, he had hung out with people of questionable character, were both found in relatively the same manner, except victim number 2 had had some oil substance put on their skin to make it turn like a reddish leather kind of quality, which was just like victim 0. So this is how those murders get tied together. It'll be the coroner who will start looking at these bodies and be the first one to recommend that this is the work of one person based on the types of cuts and how efficient it is done with knowledge of the human body. So it's the coroner who first brings that idea to the Cleveland Police Department that this is the work of one person. It's just an overgrown area now, but at the time, this was a part of Kingsbury Run in Cleveland, Ohio. On January 26th, 1936, the body of Florence Polillo was found against a wall here, between 2315 and 2325 East 20th Street. So this is the 3rd victim, officially, of the Cleveland Torso Killer, and the 2nd one identified. She was a prostitute. Again, people who don't want to talk to the police, so you're not getting good ideas about who she was with in her final moments. But the man that she had lived with for a time was arrested, and he was coerced into a confession that he had killed her. And so the police had believed that they had gotten the Cleveland Torso Killer. However, he had committed suicide in his cell shortly after that and never able to get any other corroborative evidence. June 5th, 1936, an unidentified John Doe is found in Kingsbury Run, and he will be called the Tattooed Man. He will have tattoos all over his body. His picture will be taken, and the picture of the tattoos will be taken and placed in the newspaper. Again, nobody comes forward. Nobody recognizes him, although they do believe in 1930, if you're tattooed, you're probably either a sailor or had been in prison. They believe this gentleman was a sailor, but nobody again came forward. Cleveland is on the Lake Erie, so there would definitely be sailors in the area. He had been cleaned, he had been drained of blood. Another reasons to believe that the Cleveland Torso Killer had another location where he would actually do his murdering and then move the bodies to other areas. Again, he was never identified. If you look at the Cleveland Police Museum, they have the death masks of these victims to try to identify them still today. December 1939, enter Elliott Ness.
Welcome everybody to the Wild Wild West, a state that's untouchable like Elliott Ness.
He is paid by the Cleveland mayor to come in and be safety director. He wants him to take over cleaning up the town, prohibition. But then when the Cleveland Torso Killer is scaring residents, he asks him to catch the Cleveland Torso Killer. So Elliott Ness puts a lot of people on that case. He's rounding up people, he's investigating people. He believes that he actually has found the Cleveland Torso Killer. He interrogates him, but he can't find evidence to connect him. The last murder victim is found August 16th, 1938, and that's it for Ness. He's done. So on August 18th, 1938, he burns Kingsbury Run shantytown. He displaces 300 people and burns 100 shacks here. Now, the murders stop, so it is effective in that means, but you're also displacing hundreds of people. So I'm at the 9th Street lakefront here in Cleveland, Ohio. This is Lake Erie, the Cleveland Browns Stadium. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is right behind me, and that is a children's science museum. But in 1938, this was pretty much a dump. But the city has cleaned it up. It's a nice area to come to now, and you don't think about the Cleveland Torso Killer's final victims being found in this area. So on August 16th, the last 2 victims of the Cleveland Torso Killer were found here, a male and a female, both decapitated. It'll be Jane Doe 4 and John Doe 6. The finding of these victims is what's going to motivate Elliott Ness to burn down Kingsbury Run, but the murders will stop. And no one will ever be brought to justice as the mad butcher of Kingsbury Run, and Elliott Ness will always feel disappointment that he was never able to find the killer. So here I am at West Park Cemetery. I wanted to talk a little bit about navigating graveyards. My recommendation is always go to the cemetery office, especially if you do find a grave and all it gives you is the cemetery. This cemetery is huge. There would be no way for me to find this grave on my own in even 5 hours, 6 hours. It would take a whole day. So I stopped at the office, I gave him his name, I gave him the year he died, and they were able to give me section 15, tier 44, grave 75, and then they gave me a map to show me where that is at. Most cemetery offices can do that. If your cemetery has an office, sometimes in these older cemeteries, they do not. And I'm looking for the grave of Frank Dolezal. Frank Dolezal was the first suspect in this case of the Cleveland Torso Killer. Now, Frank Dolezal, there is an investigator, there is a person who has done a lot, put in a lot of time to investigate these crimes and has cleared his name. And that person who has cleared his name bought a headstone for him that says "Rest Now," because he hung himself in a cell from a hook that was 5'7" off the ground, and he was 5'8". Again, they found 7 broken ribs. His confession is a bunch of gibberish with a bunch of like very, very hardcore facts that the police knew. So people believe that he was kind of coerced into his confession and wrote it out based on what the police were telling him to say. And then he wrote gibberish and then wrote out the confession. They don't believe he was the Cleveland Torso Killer because he doesn't have medical knowledge. He was just ran in those same crowds of people, and because he knew victim 3, he had lived with her at one point, and he went to the same bars and places as Edward Andrassy, that the police just wanted to find a suspect, and he fit pretty well. And then by him killing himself and never going to trial, it was just an easy way to put the whole thing to rest. So here is his grave. I actually was able to find it. It took a while because it has overgrowth around it. In August of 2010, he was exonerated for the killings, and they believe he was murdered in jail. But there should be rest now under here. There we go, rest now. And that's what the investigator made sure was on here. So I'm at Calvary Cemetery here in Cleveland, and we're going to be going to section 81 right here where Dr. Francis Sweeney is buried, and we're going to talk about the prime suspect in the torso killer.
Dun, 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 dun.
He is in an unmarked grave that says McGreevy on it for his sister, his married name. I cannot find it here, but I found S. Sweeney. It's not Francis Sweeney because he's unmarked, but this is the section that he's supposed to be in. So I don't know if this is a relation or not, so I thought I would just sit here. Francis Sweeney is Elliott Ness's #1 suspect. He is the person that Elliott Ness takes to the hotel, interrogates for 10 days, lets him sober up, does a polygraph on, which he fails twice. Elliott Ness tells him, I think you are the Cleveland torso killer, and Sweeney says, prove it. And it's after that that the last 2 bodies found on August 16th are found within view of Elliott Ness's window from his office. So East 9th Street, downtown where we were, which is today Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the Cleveland Browns football stadium, was where Elliott Ness's office was. In the view of his window is where those last 2 bodies were found, almost like taunting him. That's when he burns down the Kingsbury Run shantytown, and the murders will stop. But Sweeney is the #1 suspect. Even case investigators today think Sweeney was the mad torso killer. He was a doctor. He was an alcoholic. Now that doesn't mean that he would kill people, but he was abusive to his wife and children. His wife left him.
Sounds like a real piece of work.
His doctor's office was downtown, right next to a mortuary. And what's interesting about that, or a funeral home, is most of these bodies were drained of blood and scrubbed. And so investigators were wondering, well, what happens to the blood? Where's the blood go? Now, 1930, there could be many different places where it could go, but it would be easy to dispose of blood in a funeral home and operate in a funeral home. And because Sweeney's doctor's office was next door to the funeral home, he had access to the funeral home. They allowed him to go in and dissect bodies and look at bodies, so he would have access to do that. He also checked himself into mental clinics.
I'm ready to go in, Coach. Just give me a chance.
But a case investigator, in this case, was able to coincide his locations with the Cleveland torso killer locations. Plus, checking yourself into a mental clinic in the 1930s, you had free access to come and go.
We have another.
Someone will go on to taunt Elliott Ness for the rest of his career, sending him postcards and things like that. So people do still think it was Dr. Francis Sweeney who was taunting him. But this is where Calvary Cemetery is where Dr. Francis Sweeney is buried, in Cleveland, Ohio. So I'm at St. Mary's Cemetery in Cleveland, Ohio. This is not far from Kingsbury Run. This is where victim 1 is buried. Edward Andrassy is buried here. I'm gonna try to find his grave. Pretty much a desolate cemetery, so there's no office here. So I'm basically gonna have to just look around and see what I can find. So here I am beside Edward Andrassy's grave. And he is victim 1 of the Cleveland torso killer. And Edward Andrassy worked as a hospital orderly, and he had eventually turned to petty crime. But it was because he had worked at a hospital orderly that they had his fingerprints on file. And having his fingerprints on file is how they were able to identify him. His grave was hard to find. It is in the middle of this cemetery, in the middle of Cleveland, that does not look like it's even used anymore. There's no office here. I was very lucky to have found it. So I am going to leave a heart rack here. He remains just one of the 2 victims that were positively identified. So Edward Andrassy here at the St. Mary's Cemetery in Cleveland, Ohio, not far from Kingsbury Run. So I'm here at Highland Park Cemetery in Highland Hills, Cleveland. I'm right outside of Cleveland. And I'm here at the Potter's Field for Highland Park Cemetery. It is not in the actual cemetery. You have to go out of the cemetery and turn onto another street and come in a back way. It is not marked. The street is not marked when you come out here. It's very difficult to find, but this is the Potter's Field that the victims of the Cleveland torso killer were buried. And they're buried in plot 102, section 3. So if anyone ever wanted to identify them today, they could be exhumed. DNA evidence could be used. But I'm here, they have this boulder here to mark the Potter's Field. It looks like this whole area is basically somewhat groomed. I see a flag off in the distance over there, a cross. But today I am gonna leave this heart rock for the victims of the Cleveland torso killer. I'll leave it here on this rock. Victims who never got justice, they're not forgotten. My closing thoughts as I walk away. The Cleveland torso killer was able to operate in an area where his victims were very vulnerable. Vulnerable to the history of the time with the Depression and able to take advantage of that. And his victims were never identified because no one wants to come forward to say they're friends with these people, they know these people, they hang out with these people. And people don't really trust the police force in the 1930s. Very much corrupt. Unfortunately, we'll never really know for sure who he was unless there's some confession, some book we can find. And it'll be a notorious serial killer in America. This will forever bother Elliott Ness. This will be the black mark on Elliott Ness's career. They'll never know who the Cleveland torso killer actually was. At least now we know for sure he no longer exists. Will forever be notorious as an unsolved mystery here in Cleveland, Ohio. On to my next Walk with History.